Hello, thanks for joining us. You're watching Scotland at 7. Today it's Wednesday, the 4th of of May, and I'm on here tonight with Chris McCusker, who's joining us online. Good evening, Chris. Can you hear and see us okay?
Yep, good evening,
That's
Jude.
fine. That's fine.
Nice to be joining you.
Yes, thanks for joining us again. If you haven't met Chris before, Chris is a trade unionist, activist, and carer, and also you're busy, I believe, with the refugee hub in Newton Mearns. That's in the south side of Glasgow. I think you've been there today, haven't you, Chris?
Claxton it is, Hugh.
It's
Claxton, but
Claxton,
yes,
exactly right. Just along the road a wee bit.
Eastwood Refugee Aid.
Right. Okay, thanks, Chris. So I'm going to discuss the main stories with you in a couple of minutes. But first of all, let's look at the roundup, the latest from Ukraine. This is day 70 of Putin's invasion of Ukraine. And as we'll hear later on, the EU is proposing a ban on all Russian oil imports and a sixth package of sanctions aimed at Russian President Vladimir Putin's aggression in Ukraine. The President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, announced the proposals in a speech to the European Parliament. That was earlier today. Measures will include a complete import ban on all Russian oil, whether it's seaborne or pipeline, both crude and refined. Ursula von der Leyen said, "We will make sure that we phase out Russian oil in an orderly fashion in a way that allows us and our partners to secure alternative supply routes and minimises the impact on global markets." Other measures proposed include listing high-ranking military officers and other individuals who are accused of committing war crimes in Bucha, banning 3 Russian state-owned broadcasters from EU airwaves, and expelling Sberbank from the SWIFT payments system. Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu has said that the remaining Ukrainian forces in the Azovstal steel plant in Mariupol are securely blocked. Buses have left Mariupol carrying civilians this morning, according to Ukraine's governor of Donetsk, who's Pavlo Kyrylenko. Russian Defense Ministry says it has disabled 6 railway stations in Ukraine which are used to supply Ukrainian forces with foreign weapons. 1 person died and 2 were injured as a result of shelling by Ukrainian forces of an oil depot at Makiyevka, which is in the Russian-controlled area of the self-proclaimed Donetsk People's Republic to the east of Ukraine. Russia has deployed 22 battalion tactical groups near Izium in the Kharkiv region of eastern Ukraine in its attempt to advance along the northern axis of the Donbass, according to the UK Defence Ministry. The armed forces of Belarus began sudden large-scale drills to test their combat readiness, its defence ministry has said. Ukraine does not rule out the possibility that Russia could use armed forces from Belarus in their war. The Russian Foreign Ministry has announced sanctions against 63 Japanese officials, journalists, and professors for engaging in what it called unacceptable rhetoric against Moscow. The European Union is considering additional military support to Moldova, according to the EU Council President Charles Michel, who was on a visit to Chisinau today. Now back to Ukraine. Russia is stepping up its airstrikes on key Ukrainian supply lines, delivering billions of pounds worth of Western arms to the country, including the railway lines and warehousing. With both Moscow and Kyiv locked in the race to shape conditions for the current phase of the war in Ukraine, the rapid and growing flow of weapons supplied by Ukraine's Western backers has become the increased focus for both sides. On Tuesday, Russian airstrikes hit 6 train stations in central and western Ukraine as the Kremlin stepped up its targeting of key infrastructure, including electrical and water substations, that's to supply water. A Russian cruise missile also hit a hangar in Odessa, which houses the Turkish Bayraktar, that's the 2B to over $33 billion support package for Ukraine, including $20 billion in military aid. Speaking last month, President Biden talked of the need for increased supply of heavier weapons to Ukraine, describing this as a critical window as Russia shifted its focus to the east. The supply of weapons to Ukraine has been given a boost after military experience shortages and stockpiles of ammunition have dwindled, but it has also been driven by the increasingly vocal view among Western leaders, including Biden and Prime Minister Johnson, that the threat posed by Russia has to be taken seriously. Okay, so Chris, that's our roundup. Day 70 of the war in Ukraine. Last February, I wasn't Wasn't expecting to still be talking about that after 70 days, but with this increasing flow of weapons from the West, it's certainly not going to end anytime soon, is it?
No, no, I think I said that a couple of weeks ago, Hugh. This will unfortunately drag on well into through the summer and possibly into autumn, and it's actually a horrendous thought to think that it will drag into the winter as well, given the unforgiving nature of the winters that both Russia and Ukraine suffer. One would only hope that there is going to be some sort of resolution to this through, meaningful discussions. It's not going to be, I mean, it is war, but what I'm saying is, we hope that it's not going to be all-out war. As welcome as Ursula von der Leyen's comments, to cajole the other 27 nations to, make that stand of solidarity and begin the slow retreat, shall we say, of the dependency on not just Russia's oil, but I also heard that they are wanting to try and stave off, any Russian involvement in the 27 countries, and we're just waiting for Britain to follow suit on that, because I hate to state the obvious, but we're not a member of the EU anymore. So, they have to look at anything that is going to severely hamper Vladimir Putin's war effort. If that means, tougher sanctions on the whole trade of Russia, whether it be through oil or gas, then that's the way that we have to go.
Well, in fact, there's more of that in our next story, because what the EU Commission announced today was really a gradual ban. They can't do it all at one go. So they're going to slowly phase out the import of fossil fuels from Russia as part of their sanctions against Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And as I was saying earlier, the EU Commission today has proposed a ban on the import of all Russian crude oil within 6 months, Chris, so we can't ban it now. And also a ban on all refined products such as petrol by the end of this year. So, outlining the plan to the European Parliament this morning, Ursula von der Leyen, the Commission President, said the Commission favours a complete ban on Russian oil, whether by sea or by pipeline. It will not be easy, she went on to say. Some member states are strongly dependent on Russian oil, but we simply have to work on it. These proposals, of course, need the backing of all 27 member states to prevent the use of the veto. The Commission therefore suggests that Hungary and Slovenia, who are both highly dependent on Russian fuel, may continue with their current contracts till late 23. Altogether, the European Union gets 26% of its oil imports from Russia, but Slovenia and Hungary, who both use the southern Druzhba oil pipeline, use considerably more. The chief executive of Norway's fossil fuel giant Equinor, who's Anders Oppedal, said today that Europe needs to get more gas from Norway. The state-owned company today boosted record sales as the price of Brent crude soared to $108 per barrel. Equinor's pre-tax earnings in the first quarter of this year were $18 billion, and that compares to 4.1 billion in the same period of last year. So that's actually a more than a fourfold increase. So there's a lot in there, isn't there? Where will we start on that? So my point earlier on, of course, is that the European Union is talking tough, but they admit they can't stop taking Russian oil today, because quite simply a lot of people will just have to turn the heating off in whole countries. They just cannot afford to get rid of oil from Russia today. So that's just the reality, isn't it, Chris? We don't really use a lot of Russian oil, so it's easy for us to criticise, isn't it?
It's very easy for us to criticise, and then you know, I mean, also we should remember that Italy is by far heavily dependent on Russian oil. I
Yeah,
mean, I
yeah.
think it's something in the 90% bracket and stuff like that. You know, so I mean, and it's again, this will that you know, I mean, I hate to sort of like try and make light of the situation, but it might actually help other countries to, stave off the need to rely on fossil fuels and make that transition over to a more sustainable, greener energy.
Well, you might think
Uh,
that gives a great opportunity to open a door to green and renewable politics. It should move, but look at the report from Norway that Anders Opedal is just saying he's coining it in, isn't he? Although, of course, Equinor is state-owned, so ultimately it's the people of Norway who are going to benefit from that. But Scotland isn't benefiting
well,
from this high oil price, is it?
Well, no, I mean that's absolutely correct. And you know, I mean, if that's the way that Norway want to go, then you know, fair play to them. You know, we don't have that choice because obviously the Scottish oil fields are controlled by Westminster, and you know, the Scottish government are committed to making a green transition. In fact, the SNP Trade Union Group have been advocating this for
Uh-huh.
a number of years. You know, is to make that transition from fossil fuel into using more greener energy. But it's not only that as well, it's the transition of the jobs over,
Hmm.
you know, and actually upskilling the existing workforce in that industry to transfer over to the green industry. That is basically what you know what it means in a true sense to have a just transition. You know, and that's even before we talk about you know the likes of the local communities and stuff like that that are going to benefit from it. But you
So,
know, again, the British government, you know, and everybody will think me remember wonderfully that back in 2013 we were told that there was no oil left in Scotland. And it wasn't feasibly viable for Scotland to, you know, rely on any potential oil any oil uh,
what
profits.
the revenues? Yeah,
And,
yeah.
now all of a
Hmm.
sudden the Tories are advocating the fact that we start drilling again in Campbell, you know, which would take 10 years in order to actually get a barrel out of there. And
Yes, it's
it's
very
just
interesting.
not.
Yeah, there is that crossroads. Are we going to go for more oil, as Prime Minister Johnson wants to? Or I wonder what the European Union is saying. I think we're discussing this just now. So they are saying we have to face transitioning away from Russian oil. So again, we'll see what kind of technologies can be used. But at the moment, the first response is, of course, just to take more oil from Norway or from Qatar or even from America. So maybe the green transition isn't the first thing on the agenda. Well, it'll be interesting to see how the European Union begins to put more resources into renewables. I'm going to move on to the next story now, Chris. Nicola Sturgeon says the Tories are out of excuses on the rising cost of living. SNP leader Nicola Sturgeon has told voters that Boris Johnson has run out of excuses for failing to act on the cost of living crisis, and that Scotland can cast its verdict on the toxic Tories by voting SNP in tomorrow's council elections. The SNP campaign bus, which has been crisscrossing the country over the past 3 weeks, visited Edinburgh today, where the SNP leader joined with her Holyrood MSPs to rally support on the last day of campaigning. Ms Sturgeon said, the Tories have run out of excuses for their negligent inaction on the self-made cost of living crisis, which is hammering families across Scotland. Boris Johnson's utterly callous attitude to those who need help was once again exposed in TV interviews yesterday. The only thing that will make the Tories sit up and take notice is when they think their own jobs are on the line. And that's why this election is important. While all this is going on, the Tories are neglecting the spiralling cost of living crisis. Yeah, I think a lot of people have seen that interview with Suzanne of Good Morning Britain yesterday, but the Prime Minister, he really was out of his depth. He was being confronted with the story of an ordinary person who just can't afford to heat her house, and he had no idea really how to respond to that. It's not a situation he's experienced, is it?
No, 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 it's not. You know, and it's not for the first time that Boris Johnson has been caught, you know, shall we say, on the hook, you know, with direct questioning, and it's something that the Tories like to try and avoid. There was also the wonderful interview with, I think it was George Eustace, the rural and food minister, or something like that, who, you know, suggested that people should actually.
Yeah,
You,
we're going to come to that story again in a couple of minutes, Chris. But on
well, you know, it just once again highlights the fact that you know, regardless of Boris Johnson, there is absolutely no Tory MP that has actually got an answer for what is happening to the ordinary people on the street, and they're so aloof, and you know, so much misunderstanding about people's day-to-day issues. You know, you were talking about the old lady in the bus, and you know, I mean, she's doing that, you know, in order to, you know, not pay any energy costs in her house and keep warm at the same time. And you know, and his answer, his woeful answer, was the fact that, well, she should be happy the fact that you know, it was his government that introduced the free bus passing anyway. That's just a woeful answer from, you know, anybody who actually thinks that he's a politician.
I know, it's astonishing, isn't it? Yeah, he's that's his Oxford debating skills coming in there, Chris. So yeah, you're quite right. Politicians usually are quite mentally agile, haven't they? But he was dumbfounded in that interview. Oh, and by the way, it wasn't even Johnson that brought in the bus pass that he was talking about. That was already coming in under the previous Labour mayor. So he can't even claim credit for that. Not that it's an answer. So let's move on to the next story. Might as well, yeah. So as we were saying, Chris, another Conservative minister was criticised today over the cost of living. Shoppers can deal with soaring food prices and cope with the cost of living crisis by choosing value brands in the supermarkets. It's George Eustace, who's in fact the Environment Secretary, who made that suggestion. The Cabinet Minister overseeing food and farming, that's the UK government we're talking about, told Sky News food prices were going up because of the knock-on effect of higher energy costs, pushing up fertiliser and feed costs. He said, generally speaking, what people find is that by going over to some of the value brands rather than the own branded products, they can actually contain and manage their household budget. Responding to Mr Eustace's comments, SNP's Westminster Deputy Leader Kirsten Oswald MP said, the remarks from a senior Tory government minister that families struggling with the Tory cost of living crisis should buy value brand products are utterly patronising and insulting. The Tories have once again shown how out of touch they are with the challenges facing households, rising prices and bills piling on pressure and pushing people over the brink. So George Eustace is an expert on value brands, but it's tinkering around the edges, isn't it? Trying to save a penny here and there, but missing the big point of the cuts to universal credit, for example, and pushing up taxes. So the big question is, I read also today that somebody, I think it was somebody else in the UK government, might have been Prime Minister, said that we can't afford to, the economy can't afford to deal with the crisis. The economy can't take it. So we can afford to keep people in poverty, but we can't afford to do anything about it. So what do you make of this economic thinking?
Yeah, I mean, that is, you know, it's absolutely shocking, and again, it's indicative of the Tory policy towards, you know, and I'll use this quite directly, trickle down economics, and that is basically, it's you know, that the economics only work for the elite, and the you know, the working class just basically have to put up with you know, the terrible sacrifice that you know, people have got to make on, you know, day-to-day living. I mean, George Eustace, you were saying that he's that he was championing saver values and stuff like that and all the rest of it. Well, you know, I mean, George Eustace has really not got an awful lot to crow about, seeing as how he's an ex UKIP member. That'll give you a slight insight into the actual cut of the man's jib. So I mean, it's not just the UKIP values that are an undercurrent and the way that George Eustace thinks, but we can see it. It's pretty endemic in every Tory MP that they really don't give a toss about the plight of the average person on the street who is struggling with the rise in energy prices, the rise of food prices, which some of it, not all of it, but some of it has been aggravated by obviously us leaving the European Union. And then for the again, for them to suggest, I mean, I would say that, I mean, roughly, personally, I rarely visit the top 4 supermarkets in the country, and that's basically a preference. The discounter shops, shall we say, such as Aldi and Lidl, they are not high street brand names in any such shape or fashion, but the food is predominantly affordable, although I have seen the prices going up, and possibly many people have seen prices going up on sort of like staple commodities, shall we say, such as pasta and things like that, have taken a sharp price hike. But again, you wonderfully pointed out the fact that Boris Johnson is, or the Tories in general, are just unwilling to address the actual fundamental issues of the day, which is the obvious rise in energy prices, where other governments have chosen to cap the energy rise at 4%, I think, in France, Spain, Germany, all the rest of it. It is a policy choice, to allow this to happen to your citizens. That is what it is. It is a policy choice. It's a direct policy choice. There is an alternative choice, and I don't mean to sound like a Labour candidate or a Labour MP or anything like that, but there is an alternative choice. I don't know if Labour have got the answers, but the alternative is sitting across the government benches. And unfortunately, the system that we're in just now, where we're either governed by the Tories or we're governed by Labour.
Yep.
Well, quite clearly, the Tories aren't working. It's time for Keir Starmer to step up.
Well, I'm glad you raised that question. Now, the next story actually is going to be about Keir Starmer and what would he do if he did have the opportunity to take over from Boris Johnson, because the SNP have today criticised Keir Starmer's refusal to commit to reversing the UK government's increase in national insurance, despite Mr Starmer having previously criticised the Tories' decision to implement the rise. The Labour leader previously condemned the increase, saying it's hitting struggling households with the Tory cost of living crisis. He described it as the wrong tax at the wrong time, but he's not going to pledge to reverse the rise if he was in power. He was speaking Good Morning Britain today. Mr Starmer went on to say he can't possibly set out in detail what Labour would do to help families if the Labour Party were in government. Speaking for the SNP, Kenny Gibson, the MSP, said that the Labour leader's television appearance is yet another example of Keir Starmer's Labour repeating the mistakes of the past, and shows that the party cannot be trusted to protect families across Scotland. Mr Gibson went on to say, when push comes to shove, Keir Starmer is all talk and no action. It's a repeat of the mistakes in the past, and Mr Gibson added, this is not the first time Starmer has refused to commit to U-turning on a policy they claim is deeply damaging. He has repeatedly said there is no case to reverse Brexit, despite catastrophic the catastrophe contributing significantly to the cost of living crisis. I think what we're talking about here, Chris, is the right-wing drift of Remain parties in the UK. As you mentioned earlier, I didn't know that actually, that George Eustace had been in UKIP, but clearly one of the things that happened in English politics is that UKIP isn't needed any longer because the Conservatives moved right to take on their policies. But Keir Starmer's Labour also think the way to fight back is for Labour to move to the right as well and do a repeat Tony Blair. That's what they're trying to do, isn't it?
Well, yeah, but honestly, I don't think that Labour have got the capacity to reinvent themselves. They have, they embraced the new Labour vision under Tony Blair, and made that radical step from the left to the I would possibly say centre of politics. To appeal to all things to all men routine. And we've seen that they wonderfully rejected the left politics from Jeremy Corbyn, because it didn't suit their mantra, it didn't suit their narrative. Now we've got Keir Starmer, I would say, solidifying his position towards the centre right, by not committing to make those reverses in policy. So again, leading on from my earlier tirade, it would be the question, which obviously everybody can participate in tomorrow, is not to endorse any unionist candidate in any such way, shape, or form at the polls, but obviously to where possible vote SNP 1 and 2. And if that's not available to you, then I would suggest that you endorse the closest Green candidate. There are other parties out there that people are more than welcome to, go and lend in your vote if that's your, if that takes your fancy. But what my main point here is the fact that there is no other alternative for Scotland other than independence. Because whether it's Boris Johnson or whether it's Keir Starmer that are leading, any Westminster government, neither of them have got a positive vision for Scotland, and for what Scotland wants. Quite clearly, Keir Starmer won't reverse the biggest infliction of self-harm that any one nation has ever imposed upon itself, to withdraw from the European Union, where quite clearly, the SNP and the Greens have all committed to, rejoining the EU and taking their place at the top table within Europe.
Yep, of course. So that might be a decision for the future. Of course, if the main appeal of Labour is to say general election, that's probably going, well, it might be 2024, might be 2025. So we'll hear, I hope, sometime this summer when the Scottish Government plans to go ahead with the independence referendum, which has been promised. But of course, a lot of that might, as you say, Chris, depend on the results, on the election results here. Who knows what happens if the Conservatives do as badly as the polls suggest. Anyway, by the way, you also mentioned the Green Party. We do have an interview with the Green candidate, which I conducted yesterday, so we'll show that at the end of this programme, so that's coming up. Now, on the local elections, our next story, the SNP's deputy leader, Keith Brown, MSP, has said that the people of Scotland cannot trust Labour to protect local services with a string of failures which are still costing councils across the country. 5 years on from the last time Labour were in government in the councils, that is, taxpayers are still paying for the £30 billion bill from Labour's disastrous PFI contracts. These are wasting nearly 10% of the education budgets in Scottish councils. Glasgow City Council is also still paying the price of the Labour administration, with reports that it could have to remortgage properties. This is to pay for Labour's disgraceful failure over the years to ensure equal pay for women as women workers. That was a wrong which the SNP has now acted to right. In fact, that was put right when the SNP administration took over Glasgow under Susan Aitken 5 years ago. Commenting, Keith Brown said, "Wherever Labour goes, disaster follows as taxpayers across Scotland continue to pay for their decisions more than a decade after they were in office. They simply cannot be trusted to protect local services. People in Scotland cannot trust Labour to support local services and give them the funding they need." Well, the argument here is about two Labour decisions. So I talked about Susan Aitken paying the women the women members of staff and levelling up that equal pay dispute. So let's move on to the other story. I don't know if we feature this often enough, because under Gordon Brown, really, Labour came up with this wizard wheeze of let's build new schools, let's build more local authority facilities, but we'll not pay for it. We've got this imaginary scheme called PFI. And I think the trick was it doesn't go down as public spending. It was put into another box. But it's really just a mortgage and you have to pay for it later. So it's build now, pay later. And we're still paying a lot of money for a long time. So it looked like a great idea at the time, didn't it, the PFI scheme? But it ends up being really expensive in the long run and somebody else has to pay for it.
Well, and not only that as well, the viewers will be well versed in the fact that the PFI scheme was rolled out to all the major hospital car parks. The SNP worked hard in order to eradicate the PFI scheme, so that our NHS workers, nurses, doctors, surgeons, hospital porters, cleaners, you name it, they now, and patients obviously, now no longer pay to actually park, in the hospital estates, and that's obviously, the right thing to do. It's not always practical to take the bus in order to go to the hospital for obvious reasons. But again, yeah, as you highlight that the dinosaur of Labour politics, Gordon Brown came up with this. Kind of like, I don't know, it's kind of like, when I first read about it, I actually thought it sounded like a pyramid scheme more than anything else. Where the top get everything, and everything else gets sort of like trickled down. So I mean, yeah, like again, I go back to the fact that even although it's local elections, an endorsement for for a unionist candidate is an endorsement for the continuance of Scotland being subjugated to the establishment in Westminster. Because Annas is loyally tied to the British Empire, which is something that I just can't compute in my own mind, bearing the fact what the British Empire done to his parents and grandparents' land back in India and Pakistan in 1910, but that's neither here nor there. It's little wonder what the attraction is, to the actual establishment, and again, even talking about Jeremy Corbyn, and I had high hopes for Jeremy Corbyn when he took over the leadership of the Labour Party. Obviously, remembering what he was like as a backbench MP, and he was very much anti-establishment, and all of a sudden, when he becomes Labour leader, he actually wants to be a member of the very establishment that he was fighting against, and it just I just couldn't square that circle. Very much the fact that he likes he advocated for a free Palestine and a unified Ireland, but not an independent Scotland. So I mean, all these things, politicians can come out with wonderful sound bites, when it when it comes to election time, and in the fairness of impartiality, no party is alone in
Okay.
this. I mean, plenty of SNP candidates and Green candidates have come up with a couple of faux pas. What I'm really trying to say is the fact that local politics mean local matters, and you can change national politics by
Hmm.
being involved in local issues, but just not getting distracted,
Hmm.
with the actual nonsense that's going on nationally. And if,
Well, we'll see what
if
the
people
local
remember
focus
that.
is tomorrow. Of course, we often get independents standing in the local council elections, and that's particularly true of Orkney, where nearly everyone standing is an independent. So local issues are coming to the fore there. However, that was the SNP criticising Labour for their previous time when they were in the city of Glasgow, and of course for the kind of PFI projects when Labour was in power in London. So, still talking about money, Chris. The next story is about London and money. The Crossrail, London Crossrail, delayed for 4 years and more than £4 billion over budget, is now due to open on the 24th of May. Originally set to open in 2018 on a budget of £14.8 billion, the final total has reached £19 billion. The line is expected to massively increase transport capacity in London and South East England, reducing journey times and offering more spacious and larger trains. The UK government's Transport Secretary Grant Shapps accused the Labour Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, of breaking the pre-election purdah by announcing the opening date the day before the local elections, despite the fact that the work was partly funded by Transport for London and construction work started during Boris Johnson's time as mayor. Although the opening will take place on the 24th of May, some connections are not yet complete, which means passengers might have to change train en route. But that's another one of these public sector projects which ran over. They sometimes do, don't they? And eventually you just have to keep on paying, isn't it? It seems that in construction projects, if something goes wrong, the customer has to pay for it. That's not happened before. Happened many times before, but 4 billion, that's 4,000 million over budget. Why is that not a national scandal? Why are questions not being asked in the House?
Questions,
Well, on
questions,
holiday, I
questions
know,
should
but
be asked. But the wider question should be, how much extra did Scotland have to subsidise the this
Mhm.
vanity project that will not benefit Scotland in any such way, shape, or fashion. And speaking as somebody who knows London well, or lived there for nigh on 12 years. London doesn't need any more infrastructure. It just needs better infrastructure, better ran infrastructure. And Sadiq Khan, in running London's LTR, it's it is broken beyond repair, and it needs joined up properly. But I mean, that's not just down to Sadiq Khan. That's down to years of woeful neglect by many mayors. One of them famously was Boris Johnson. But I mean, the actual infrastructure itself is, it actually defies logic. If I'm thinking about the London that I remember, and I'm just like, what is this capacity going to bring? Because we're in a time now where many people are choosing to work from home. We've got used to that over the last 2 years, and many people are advocating, to continue to work from home, and it's suiting some companies to do so. So I mean, where is the benefit of this, customer-based
Well,
travel
you
system?
can certainly raise the point that Scotland is paying for London Crossrail, but of course Scottish people do sometimes visit London, so we can use it as well. But I think probably people that I'm thinking of the Northern Powerhouse. I think people in the north of England might be saying 4 billion over budget in London, and yet they couldn't even build that high speed train to Bradford. Remember that was the
That's
thing
correct.
last
Yeah.
year, and I mean, well, sure, this is what they call the red wall seats, isn't it? But you'll read analysis and people in the Guardian say that really what the UK economy does is it focuses more investment in London. So it's not just Scotland's paying for it, but every other bit of England is also paying to have more investment piled into London. So
Well,
there's two
again,
ways of looking at
just
it. I mean, I
yeah,
was
yeah,
just going to
yeah.
say the argument is, of course, people like Boris Johnson will always say London makes the money, London creates the value, and everybody else is living off that value. But I've read economists say no, that's completely upside down. The rest of the money, money flows into London from everywhere else.
Well, in certain scenarios it is, but the case was, I think, highlighted back in the 80s, which made other towns and cities sit up and actually do this pretty basic mathematical equation. Is that if you count the amount of cranes and hoists and stuff like that that are actually working in a city, you can roughly work out the level of investment going into that city. Now, as I say, I was in London late 80s, well into the early 2000s, and every time you went into London, there was a new crane going up. If it was the Shard or if it was the many things down on the actual Thames that have been revamped. And so I mean, heavy investment into one capital. It just highlights the inequality without the actual British Isles. And it's long been the case that the establishment look after the what is inside the M25 orbital, and the people outside, such as those constituencies in the Red Wall thing at the north of England, have vastly suffered because of lack of investment. I mean, even if you were to just take one instance, like Glasgow's Clydeside, I mean, I remember, and I'm sure you'll remember, Hugh, the Glasgow Garden Festival.
Yeah,
I think it was
yeah,
early 80s. Now,
yeah. Government.
that was a chance. That was a chance for the council of that era, Labour, to actually invest on that waterfront and bring it up to a standard where it would attract businesses into the city and make the waterways more versatile and all the rest of it. And it never happened. It was rolled up like a carpet and put away in a cupboard.
That's right. Yep. There's not a great deal of activity on the River Clyde. Is there? I go over it every day coming into the studio, and it's remarkable that there's no boats on it. By the way, the other thing I should mention when we're talking about London Cross Rail is, of course, HS2. That was the other route to take all that investment out of London and move it into the north. But of course, as we've said before, the HS2 isn't even going to go as far north. It never was going to come to Scotland, but it's not even going to go to much of northern England either. So, again,
It's
that
not even
seems
going into Wales.
no, it's certainly not going to Wales. Not even going to reach Derby, I think. So it's not going to get very
Yeah,
far
that's right.
if it's ever finished, by the way, and that's also massively over budget. But so that's the question of investment in London, who pays for it, who benefits from it. Now I'm going to move on to our final story tonight because we're going to finish up with that interview which I did yesterday. Now we've just heard this morning that Piers Morgan's ratings has dived as he begins his new show on Talk TV. Despite the hype surrounding his return to television, Piers Morgan, the anchor who walked off his own show, Good Morning Britain, due to criticism from another member of the team, ratings have dramatically fallen for his show on Rupert Murdoch's Talk TV. From last week's first night, which had 317,000 viewers, this week's show dropped in viewer numbers by 80% to 62,000. That's from 317,000 down to 62,000 in a week. Mr. Morgan, who gleefully tweeted last week's ratings, announced that ratings don't matter, telling his social media followers that television ratings should be ignored. The Talk TV, which plays up being straight-talking and anti-woke, has faced a significant drop in viewer numbers since the channel went live just last week. I'm trying to read this out seriously, Chris. Other programmes on the channel show such low viewing figures that they don't show up on the broadcaster's audience research board, the official ratings agency. So there you are. Couldn't happen to a nicer chap, eh?
Honestly, I'm trying to catch my breath here. This has to be one of the funniest pieces of news journalism that I've ever happened to comment on this channel. Look, the man's an absolute joke. He should have buried his head in whatever self-dignity that he had when he left the Good Morning studios and had a radical rethink about how he conducts himself. It isn't about anchoring a news programme or a discussion show. It's about Piers Morgan. It's about Piers Morgan trying to be relative, trying to be current, trying to be controversial, trying to be, I don't know what he's trying to be, but he end up, he just looks like an arse, to be honest with you. But it's indicative of how not just his channel, but GB News. I don't think they're doing too well either. Much lauded was that flagship.
The one thing that reminds me of GB News, which was started by Andrew Neil, but he didn't last long on it, is this idea it was anti-woke. I'm sure that although it became even more right-wing than Andrew Neil could stomach, so he left it, but they had the same idea, that there's this idea among right-wing commentators that there's a kind of a wave of woke, whatever that exactly means, that's taking over, and they're fighting against it.
Honestly, I don't actually think, Hugh, that the people who are saying, it's anti-woke, I don't actually know, if they know what woke actually means, because the right of politics will use it as a derogatory term to people who are on the left, and people on the left will use it to those on the right as some sort of jibe, without actually understanding, what woke actually means. And it is actually the origins of woke actually comes from Jamaica and the Caribbean, and the Rastafari community. To be woke is to sort of like have your eyes open and be aware, and so I mean, people glibly throw this phrase around without actually understanding what it actually truly means.
Yeah, but I was also thinking that maybe the people who think that we're fighting the wave of woke are actually fighting something that's not really there. But the audience figures collapsing suggests that it's not as big an issue as Rupert Murdoch thought it was. Fight back against the woke.
And that's why I highlight that it's a terminology that has been loosely disbanded around by both sides of the political spectrum, without both sides of the political spectrum actually knowing what it actually means. Recently we have come out, with a series of MPs who dabble in disinformation and stuff like that. Fantastically, we had Nadine Dorris trying to suggest that the MP, what is it, Michael Dobbs, was actually having a curry with Keir Starmer in 2021, where actually, he sadly died in 2019.
Oh, that's right.
This is dangerous. This is dangerous stuff that we're going into.
Of course.
People
People
need to be very, very careful about the political slagging match that goes backwards and forwards. Because it can result in some really, really, bad PR for, whoever's actually throwing it.
Well, that was simply fake news. That was just rubbish. So we do make the point here. We do make a point of checking. The news stories we read out come from genuine sources. We don't make stuff up on here. You're invited to give your opinions, of course, but the stories I read out are things that actually happened, and we do get them from proper sources and proper journalism. Right, Chris, thanks. I'm going to finish up with reminding everybody about the council elections that you've, of course, alluded to a few things already tonight. I was looking at the debate today in the Scottish Parliament, and arguments about the budget for local councils were ringing out in the Holyrood Parliament this morning as both Labour's Anas Sarwar and the Conservative leader Douglas Ross accused the Scottish Government of council cuts, while Nicola Sturgeon replied, quoting the Scottish Fiscal Commission figures, showing that Scottish funding from Westminster had been cut in real terms by 5%. The First Minister argued, however, that Scottish council funding has actually increased by 6%. Opinion polls show that Labour is liable to come second as the Tory vote looks like collapsing. Last time, 5 years ago, under the Conservative leader Ruth Davidson, she reminded voters in Scotland that her party was a Scottish Conservative and Unionist party. However, in this election, it seems that Labour are set to recapture some of that Unionist vote. The degree to which that vote has been influenced by Labour standing a former Orms Lodge Grand Master in North Lanarkshire remains to be seen. So just quickly, Chris, because I'm going to move on to that interview. So that's what it looks like according to a poll published yesterday in the Scotsman, and not surprisingly, with the various stooshes down south, the Conservative vote is down. But do you see that as because of people generally being fed up with Prime Minister Johnson's behaviour? Or is it the idea that the Unionist vote is now thinking that Anas is the man to look after the union for them?
Well, I wouldn't like to advocate the fact that Anna Sawar is capable of joined up thinking, let alone looking after the union. But that's neither here nor there. The argument being is that people are fed up with Boris Johnson. They have to understand their vote tomorrow. You are endorsing your representative of that party. So if it looks like a duck and it quacks like a duck, it probably is a duck. And if it's a unionist candidate, first and foremost, their main goal is keeping the union and subjugating Scotland to the establishment's rules and regulations. As viewers of this channel know, that is not in the best interest of Scotland. So whether it's Anna Sawar or whether it's Douglas Ross, it makes really no difference. I mean, Nicola wonderfully highlighted it, that it's really quite woeful, the fact that Anas Sawar, his highest aspiration is to be struggling with the Tories as to who gets second place and who gets third place.
Yes, that's right. I was amused at the Scotsman's headlines because it's as if coming second is actually the prize, and no mention in the headlines of the party who are actually streets ahead of both of them. So I'm just going to finish reminding people on the way the elections are conducted. So the campaigns are over now, and so tomorrow it's all down to you, the voter. The polling stations in Scotland open at 7 a.m. and close at 10 p.m. Now, this is a transferable vote. You don't vote with an X, but you place a number, 1, 2, 3, 4, or whatever, next to the names of your preferred candidate. You can give a vote to as many or as few candidates as you wish, although there will probably be 3 or 4 councillors for your area, or returned on a roughly proportional count. You don't need any photo ID, you just turn up to vote. That's it. I usually bring my voter card, but you don't even need that. As long as you turn up and give your name, you're entitled to your vote. Now, the councils will begin counting their votes on Friday morning, and the early results are expected by lunchtime. And we'll give a roundup on Friday's programme. So that's it, Chris. So thanks for joining me, and to everybody else, thank you for watching. And especially if you're one of our supporters, thank you for continuing to fund our free-to-air broadcast. If you'd like to help us make more programmes, please look at our website. And it really would be good if you would click on the donate button. And if you can make a small regular monthly contribution, that will help a lot to keep us going. Now, finally, Chris, as I said, yesterday I interviewed a Scottish Green Party candidate. I was in East Kilbride to speak to Kirsten Robb, and the issues we raised in our conversation, I think, are the kind of issues which are important no matter where you live. So thanks for watching tonight. I'll be back tomorrow, and I'll leave you with my interview with Kirsten Robb yesterday in East Kilbride. Good night. Good morning, Kirsten. Thanks for seeing me today.
Morning, Hugh.
Now, first of all, how have you been finding it going around the doors? Are people interested in hearing what the Greens have to say?
Yeah, I've loved it actually. We've knocked about 2,000 doors over the last year probably, and so we really know what people are most concerned about. So as a volunteer, I've been working on those concerns, getting things fixed up, getting parks saved, getting multi-use games areas reopened. So I've really enjoyed seeing the results of what people want me to do. So.
Now, in your own career, in fact, you're interested in community regeneration, and that's something the Scottish Government supports. And for instance, last week the Scottish Government announced a plan to have 20-minute communities and to strengthen local communities. Is that something you can bring in East Kilbride?
Absolutely. I think the Greens were delighted to push for that on the Butte Housing 5-year agreement with the SNP. So yeah, definitely I think community is so important for people, and to be able to walk and cycle to most of your facilities, doctors, schools, nurseries, shops and so on, it's very important because we want people to be able to walk and cycle and keep healthy, but also it's those community connections that matter. Who you see down the shops as your neighbour, bumping into them and talking to them and just being part of something that's really important for people.
Yes, I know what you mean. That's something you find in the older parts of Scottish towns, in the kind of tenements which always have their own local shop, and that's what a lot of the original people in East Kilbride missed when they were moved out here. But was East Kilbride, in your opinion, designed as a good place for people to live? It was designed over half a century ago, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was really designed. It's so inspiring to look back at the new town vision. It was designed to each had a neighbourhood, had an identity, it had a name, and it also had its local shops, schools and footpaths. In some communities now there's no footpaths, so it was built for people to walk and cycle, but it's also built for the car too.
Yeah, of course. Now what about the newer parts of town, because are they a different design? The newer parts are maybe not as well thought out as the original ones. Do they all have adequate bus routes, or is that something you'll be wanting to improve?
Yeah, I mean the area that I want to represent, East Kilbride East, is one of the older parts of the town. There's new houses mixed in, but around the edges of the town there's definitely areas that have no bus routes at all, no services within walking and cycling. So certainly I'll work on those as well, pushing those 20-minute neighbourhood ideas to new developments as well, making sure people have the services to feel like they're part of a community.
Now, transport, of course, in addition to being a necessity, is also part of the green agenda moving towards net zero. The other big point there, of course, is energy, which is, fortunately, we're moving out of winter, but people must be dreading next winter. Locally, is there anything that the councils can do, that you could encourage if you were elected, to help bring down heating bills? Does the council, and indeed the Scottish Government, have the powers to deal with the heating emergency?
Yeah, they certainly do. People are very concerned on the doorsteps about their energy bills, frightened even to some extent. So that's certainly something I do. I'd love to see more area-based energy schemes to bring the cost of energy efficiency right down when it's done across a large area. With the Greens securing £1.8 billion of energy efficiency investments in the 5-year Butte House agreement, we can certainly do things, and I think as a councillor for the area I'll be pushing the council, working with the officers to grab that funding to make our homes here more energy efficient. And it's also about the jobs it can create. We have a college here that trains people in energy sort of retrofitting housing and renewables as well. Let's create lots of jobs with that funding for local people too.
So even without getting into issues of independence, there is more that could be done locally. And now you've raised the question of local heating, so are there any test schemes in Scotland? Are any councils actually heating whole areas instead of people having individual boilers? everyone's on the same municipal heating system. Is that the idea?
Yeah, for some areas that'll work. District heating schemes, particularly for new areas or where there's industrial complexes quite close by, is to use that heat. Can't name any particular ones. I think Fife belonged to quite a while ago, has done one, but certainly there's schemes out there for trialling these things and maybe even running some areas as well already on these schemes. So yeah, that's the kind of idea. Yeah.
Now, you're also, as a candidate, you're very interested in local democracy. What changes would the Greens like to do to engage people more with the local councils?
Yeah, well, as a sort of professional, I work on community planning, so I want local people to have much more of a say on what they're driving change in the area. I think for too long people have been ignored or thinking things have been done to them by the council or the government, but I'm very much a very positive person. I think we can do more ourselves. I've seen it in action through my work and lots of other places. So asking people what they think, consulting them on decisions. We had the example here of councillors closing a play park without asking anyone, and we fought back against that through a community empowerment process, and people agreed that they needed to be consulted and they wanted the park to stay, and now that decision's been reversed. So we need to see local people much more involved and driving change, not just having a say, but saying we're going to lead change in our own area, and that's what I'm really passionate about.
Now, Greens are also interested in engaging people with nature, and there's various therapeutic reasons, of course, for people being more linked to the natural environment. East Kilbride strikes me as quite a green place, plenty of trees. Is this a good place to get people more connected to the natural world?
Yeah, I think the new town planners had such a vision because people were coming from the slums of Glasgow with not a lot of green space around, so this is why East Kilbride was created, and some of the green spaces have been lost, but we've still got the shell of the new town, the hedgerows, the lovely trees, lovely blossom at this time of year, but we can do so much to keep the green spaces we've got, maintain them, involve people in maintaining them. I volunteer down in Calder Glen Country Park, and we've done a lot, and that's pushing for change as well, so to get paths invested in. The Greens have secured lots of money for nature restoration, and we're seeing some of those projects happen now, so if I'm in there I can do much more on that, get people out, volunteer in their own area, seeing their green spaces being used, their parks being saved, and enjoying the parks with their families.
So this is a local election, of course, and they have been talking about issues which the council can't influence, but from what you've been hearing on the doorsteps, are people interested in national politics and the big events that have been happening recently, particularly involving scandals in London? Does that affect this election? Are people here talking about it?
They are a bit, particularly during Partygate. Every door we opened, it was like, can you do something about Boris? But it is a local election, or we also might try our best on that front, but I think it is a local election, so people, the 2,000 doors we knocked, people said they wanted more things for young people to do, their areas better maintained, and public services which are a bit more accountable and democratic to them. So that's what people want me to do, that's what I have been doing as a volunteer, and that's what I will be doing more as a councillor as well. So of course people are concerned about Ukraine, the Conservatives' behaviour, and wanting to hold politicians to account in general across all parties. So I want to do politics differently in this area, and with my experience as a community worker I will certainly do that.
And my final thing on national politics, and final question, the Green Party of course stands with the SNP in saying there should be a referendum on independence next year. Does that issue affect people? Are people here aware of that? Is that an issue people are talking about?
I think the constitutional question is always a high profile issue on any election, but we're just keep reminding people it's a local election, it's about our bins, not the referendum. And we do believe that if decisions are made closer to people, whether it's Scottish independence or right down to council and community level, they will be better for people. So at this election we're talking how can we bring policies, make better decisions at a local community level, not even South Lanarkshire level, but a really local level, to make our place better. So that's the change that we're driving at this election.